currently have over 2,500 members. I set it up because despite having wonderful, understanding friends, no one could really direct me or advise me through the complicated system of everything that having an SEN child brings. The name of the group sums it up completely. Whatever battle you're going through, I can assure you that despite how lonely and isolated you may feel, it's not just you. It's not just you who's brought together hundreds, if not thousands of parents battling to get the best for their children. Some of those children have a diagnosis, some of them don't. Some attend SEN schools, some are homeschooled. Some attend mainstream schools, and some sadly find themselves without any school at all because they just don't fit in, and that's just not acceptable. To tell you my entire story, I would need a whole lot longer than I have tonight, but I'll try and summarise what the impact of a mainstream school had on us. I have a daughter who is now 15. She started her school journey in a mainstream faith school. The impact of that school has had long-lasting, devastating effects to this day. She had an early diagnosis of ADHD, but due to the failings of the school and the physical and emotional abuse she endured there, she had a breakdown at just 9 years old. She found herself in a children's mental health hospital for the first time. Her journey has been a roller coaster of hospitals, diagnosis, SEN schools, inpatient units, more SEN schools, and finally a mainstream school that just gets her. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some amazingly wonderful SEN schools out there. They really do a fantastic job. But what about those kids who just don't fit the mould? What about those kids who are neither right for SEN schools nor right for mainstream? Those in-between kids. The big question is, for those in-between kids, why aren't they suitable for mainstream? I mean, they should be, right? One of the biggest flaws with the system is the fight almost every parent faces to get an EHCP. If you don't know what an EHCP is, it's an educational healthcare plan. It's a legally binding document that is supposed to detail everything that your child needs, but also provides additional funding to schools if the support needed exceeds the SEN budget of the school. The system sucks. It's without a doubt the most stressful experience any parent can go through. The EHCP is managed by your local education authority, your LEA. They work to their own agenda. In my experience, they don't want to work with any other part of the local authority. For example, CAMHS, social care. They put blockers in every step of the way, from the initial assessment through to the actual plan itself. My local authority is Hertfordshire, and without a shadow of a doubt, they have one of the worst, if not the worst, reputations in the country. When we would visit schools and we said where we live, we would be met with that, head on the shoulder sympathy look. In 2015, I commissioned a national survey that received over 1,100 responses regarding SEN provisions. This survey was featured in the Sunday Mirror and on Sky News and was referred to in the Houses of Parliament during several debates. The results were unfortunately not surprising and revealed a total failure in the SEN system. Of all the counties and boroughs around the country, around the UK, one came out bottom of the list by considerable distance, and this was Hertfordshire. Too many parents are being forced to spend thousands on legal tribunals to get an EHCP assessment when it should be the child's fundamental human right to have one if needed. EHCPs are long and complicated documents, which as a parent are often very difficult to understand and navigate. But the biggest and most serious issue is the fact that the local education authority and the school are really only interested in the money. The local education authority are only interested in not providing the money for the support needed, and schools are generally only interested in what additional money they will get to support the child. And right there in the middle is the child. Suddenly it becomes about money as opposed to what should really be the focus, the child themselves. I wish everyone writing these plans would stop. Just stop and pause for a minute. and look at the child sitting in front of them and not what's written about them on paper. If the right support is not documented, the only person who will fail will be the child. I'll give you an example. When my daughter was admitted to an inpatient unit in 2019, the head teacher of the hospital school said to me, "When I looked at her EHCP, I thought I was going to get a child with severe learning difficulties. And then I met her. There is no reason at all why she shouldn't be able to sit her GCSEs and do very well in them." Now, I have to be honest, the current EHCP that she has was actually written by an SEN school. I also remember one day on the way to hospital to visit her, my husband and I were on the phone to the head teacher of her then SEN school, and we relayed what we had been told by that head teacher. We were met with silence, total disbelief. She didn't believe that our daughter was capable of anything. By the way, she's just got a distinction in the first component of one of her BTECs and is now studying for GCSEs and other BTECs. So yes, an EHCP is critical. It has to be correct and it has to reflect the child, not the need for the school to have more money. Local education authorities need to stop being so difficult. They need to stop putting blockers in the way. The quicker the EHCP is put into place and is accurately written, the better the chances the child has to thrive in a mainstream school. When we removed our daughter from her first primary school and tried to find the right school for her, we visited so many different settings. But the gut feeling we had was just that she wasn't bear with me, was that she just wasn't right for any of them. But we had no choice. We had to have her in a school. She needed the social interaction that school and education brings. Now, I'm going to jump about a little bit here, but hopefully it will all come together and you'll understand my point. First of all, we're going to rewind 11 years to when she was about 4. She was when she first started mainstream school, well, the school's nursery to be precise. She was okay, not brilliant, struggled to settle, and a bit of a character. She was also the youngest in the year. She's an August baby, and I do think that this is something that really does need to be considered too. After the nursery, she filtered through to the main school, and that's where it all went wrong. What they tried to do was remove her character, remove her cheekiness, remove her personality. They tried to make a square peg fit into a round hole. I don't want to upset anyone here, and I know it often shocks people when I speak so matter of fact about what happened. But it really is important to hear and understand just how horrific a school that just doesn't accept quirky kids can behave and how they can destroy a child. Some of the things that that school did included locking her in a small room with a teacher on the outside, leaving her to hit the window as I went past to collect her younger brother, screaming and crying, generally being ignored, removing her tights or socks in case she strangled herself, pinning her down whilst I was forced to give her medication, refusing to give her access to a laptop which had been recommended by an educational psychologist, leaving her on her own in another room away from her friends, refusing to allow her to be part of a larger group for a school show. The list is endless. In no way was my daughter an angel, but this treatment was fundamentally the catalyst of years of mental health issues that she has suffered and the many crises we have found ourselves in. I actually asked the head teacher once if we were in the right school for her, and the response I was met with was, yes, it's going to be a rough journey, but we will get there. Essentially, it was her telling me that they were going to beat it out of her. But it got worse than that, much worse. As if this wasn't bad enough, while school were failing her on an unprecedented scale, we were also fighting CAMHS. CAMHS is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. It's supposed to do what the name suggests, but the reality is it's just another system that you have to fight. For us, we were so failed by the service that it cost us our house. That may sound like quite a sweeping statement to make, but it's the truth. You see, when we were first referred to CAMHS, we had to wait around 16 weeks for a first appointment, 4 months. That's 4 months of a child not coping in school, not coping at home, 4 months of a downward spiral in her mental health. When we were finally seen, we had 3 appointments. Only 2 of them were with our daughter. On the 3rd appointment, we were discharged with the advice and the recommendation of, here you go and buy this book and read it. The book had happened to have been written by a friend of the practitioner that we were seeing. When things got worse, which of course they were going to, we had to be re-referred, but by now the wait was over 24 weeks, 6 months. They couldn't just see her, they had to go through the entire process again, failing after failing, because when they did eventually see her, they only looked at the medical side of her ADHD. No practical help or support or therapy was provided. So guess what? She crashed, and she crashed massively. And whilst this was going on, we were looking at all options and spending a small fortune on private support. Money we didn't have, but we had to find. What other option did we have? And the end result of this, we lost our house. We were so let down by everyone supposed to be supporting and helping us, we lost focus. We were so tied up with fighting the system, paying for private care, fighting school, we had to sell our lovely home 5 years ago. None of this makes sense, does it? Why don't schools talk to CAMHS? Why don't CAMHS talk to the local education authority? Why doesn't the local education authority talk to social services? Why isn't there a designated caseworker pulling everyone together and making sure the child is the centre of everyone's attention and not just a name on 10 different sheets of paper? I did say I was going to jump around a bit, and I hope that it would come together. So let's get to where we are now and fast forward to today. She's 15 years old. Right now, she's coming to the end of a 6-week residential programme for children who have suffered developmental trauma. That right there is the impact of mainstream schooling on SEN children when it goes wrong. If a child is not loved and nurtured, they will suffer with trauma. We all know that children are not the same, so why on earth are they expected to conform as if they are? Currently, my daughter goes to a media and arts school and is in year 11. It's a mainstream school. Most kids in her school have all manner of dyed hair and hairstyles, as well as the majority having all sorts of piercings. I've lost count of the amount of piercings she has, and I think her hair is pink right now, but to be fair, by the time I get home tonight, I'm pretty convinced it will be yet another colour. My point is, this is a mainstream school. It's a school with rules and regulations. It's a school that expects respect, but it's a school that embraces these qualities in children. It's a school where not being normal is normal and is encouraged, but most importantly, it's supported. There is no reason at all that mainstream schools shouldn't be able to make those reasonable adjustments to allow our children to thrive. There needs to be a complete overhaul of the UK schooling system. A new approach is needed, and it's needed now. There has to be flexibility, there has to be compassion, there has to be understanding, and there has to be inclusivity. Without any of these, the impact of a mainstream school on an SEN child is catastrophic. Thank you.
I think we can all agree that that was pretty impactful here. Our second speaker is an expert in the field of special educational needs. Carol has an interesting and varied career, starting off as a PE teacher in a large secondary school. Later on, Carol focused on the field of special educational needs, creating a school for students with social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. Furthermore, she delivers the mandatory national award for SENCOs, co-authored the SENCO Handbook 7th edition, and delivers training on SEND. Ladies and gentlemen, Carol Burnham in the world of COVID.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry I can't join you personally tonight, and I hope that you'll be able to hear me over this Zoom link. I want to put Yael's journey through school into a historical context of the development of SEND provision, that's special educational needs and disability provision. I want to start even way before Yael was born, in the mid-1960s, when I was a teenager and a girl guide, and I was very proud of being a girl guide, and I wanted to get lots of badges. And I can't remember which badge it was, but as part of gaining this badge, I lived in Stanmore, and I was taken along to a convent on Hale Lane that made provision for people who were brain damaged, mentally handicapped. That was the language that was used. And it was a ward of about 12 to 15 people, aged ranging, I would say, 2 to 50. And these were children, young people, and adults who had all suffered brain damage and were being cared for very beautifully by the nuns. But there was nothing on offer for them in any way, shape, or form in terms of education. Every single one of those people in that ward were lying in the equivalent of a cot. The young children, obviously, in cots, and the adults were in beds with sides to them so that they couldn't fall out. And although they were cared for beautifully, there was absolutely no stimulation for them whatsoever. And this is an image that I've had on my mind ever since. Let's go forward to 1974, when these people who were excluded from education were enabled to have an education for the first time in their lives. It wasn't the same education that children in normal schools, and I want you to remember that when I use the word normal, it is only a setting on the washing machine. It doesn't have any other meaning for me in terms of the SEND world. So these children in 1974 were entitled to go to a training centre and learn how to put matches in a matchbox, that kind of thing. Though they were considered to be ineducable, and so were not offered a national curriculum in any way, shape or form. That gave rise to the birth of language such as educationally subnormal, severe, ESNS, and ESN, educationally subnormal, moderate. So we're talking here about a very punitive language that saw the child's, what we would now call special educational needs, as a fault within the child. In 1978, Baroness Warnock was commissioned to lead a working party to look into the provision of education for what were then called handicapped children. And that body reported, and their findings became the 1981 Education Act, which was the first Education Act that addressed the needs of what were then relabeled children with special educational needs rather than children with handicaps. And what this brought to light was what we call the medical versus the social model of education. So in the medical model of education, the child is seen as having the fault. So you may have a child who has a reading difficulty. So in the medical model, the teacher discovers that the child has a reading difficulty because they don't read as well as normal children might do. So then in the medical model, you diagnose, you assess and you diagnose what the problem is, and you give that child a label with whatever that reading difficulty might be. And because you've used a medical model and you've done a diagnosis, then what you do next is you provide a cure. Now, you can't provide a cure in terms of a pill for children who are experiencing special educational needs. But what you do is you take them out of mainstream provision and you put an intervention into place. And when that intervention is seen to be successful, when the child is normalized and can go back into the mainstream classroom. So the emphasis of the whole language of this medical model is that the fault is within the child. We will change the child and then we'll slot the child back into the normal classroom. And that was the model of handicap. The 1981 Education Act gave us an opportunity to look at special educational needs differently, to look at it from a societal point of view. So you have then the social model of education where the same child with the same learning difficulty, the same reading difficulty, makes the teacher question, I wonder what this child's strengths are, and I wonder what the barriers are that this child has to learning. As the teacher, I identify those barriers to learning, and it is my job as the teacher to adapt my teaching to include that child who has that difficulty. So then what happens is we put into place for that child and other children within the classroom some modified teaching methods and maybe some additional support and maybe some further assessments. But what we do is we modify the whole provision that we make for that child. And what happens under that model is that society evolves, because we've recognized that what was considered normal under the medical model only meets a very narrow range of children within school. Now, I've given you a very idealized picture of the social model of providing for special educational needs, but I wanted to give you that very strong contrast. And I recognize, certainly from what the previous speaker said, that that doesn't often happen in mainstream schools. It does sometimes, but there are many children who fall through that net. So the 1981 Act gave birth to the precursor of what the previous speaker spoke about, which was education and healthcare plans. It gave rise to statementing. And statementing was a formal method of assessing a child's special educational needs and deciding what provision would be appropriate. And most importantly, what it did is it gave additional resources to the school to meet that child's needs. I was a head teacher in 1984, managing an SEN support service for children in mainstream school. And we tried our hardest with the schools not to identify those, not to statement those children, but to make provision before they needed statementing so that we could try and enable those children to participate appropriately in mainstream classes before we labelled them as officially as having special educational needs. And that was fine while there was money around. But once the money began to dry up for special educational needs, which was around the late 1980s, it became a scramble for schools to statement children because they needed to have the additional money in order to provide the support the children needed. It became a mess. The whole system became a mess. And in 1994, we had the first special educational needs, the SEN Code of Practice, as it's called, which was guidance to schools on how to manage special educational needs. And the main thing well, first of all, that identified SENCOs for the first time, special educational needs coordinators in schools who would manage special educational needs provision. But what it also did is it brought into being a 5-stage approach to special educational needs, and it was like a ladder. And parents, quite rightly, said, okay, the first ladder was identification of special educational needs, and you climbed up that ladder, and the 5th part of that ladder was getting statementing, which was ka-ching, it meant money. So there was a race to go from the first part of the ladder to the 5th part of the ladder, so that the school got additional money. So the schools and the parents were pushing to identify more and more children with special educational needs. And at that point, it was identified that 20% of the school population had special educational needs. And that put even more pressure on the government for more money. I'm not making a judgment here about whether it was right or wrong, but these are the factors that influenced it. And so in 2001, we had a new code of practice, which took away the 5 stages, and it gave more responsibility for meeting special educational needs to the teacher. Because what happened prior to the 2001 Code of Practice was that a teacher would identify a child, Carol, she's got special educational needs, therefore she'd say to the SENCO, it's your responsibility to educate Carol. I can't do it, it's not my job. I'm a history teacher, I don't do that. You have to make the provision. So all the SENCOs were actually becoming what we called SENDOs. That means they were special educational needs people who actually taught all the children with special educational needs. They did the doing of it rather than the coordinating of any provision. And that system soon fell down, A, because it segregated children, it wasn't inclusive at all, and B, because the SENCO would be responsible for hundreds of children of providing most of their education, apart from maybe PE and DT or something like that. And that became an impossible job to do. So we lived with the 2001 code of practice for a number of years. And in 2003, Yael enters this world as a baby. And I can't remember whether Yael went to nursery, but in 2008 or around then, she went to primary school. And coincidentally, Yael, in 2008, there was a piece of legislation that said that SENCOs had to do a mandatory master's qualification in order to do their job. And what's interesting about that is that there is no other teacher, including the head teacher of any school, that mandatorily has to have a master's level qualification. So here we have potentially one of the best qualified people in the school, and the courses were nationwide, and they made a huge difference to the SENCOs who took them. It's now mandatory, all the SENCOs that did it, because it gave them a structure to do their jobs, and it moved them from being SENDOs back to being SENCOs, and I think that was a very, very good thing to do. There was also a lack of investment from probably the late 90s, when all specialist training for special needs, aspects of special needs was stopped in initial teacher training and in continuing professional development. So at this time we were having a dearth of opportunities for teachers to learn how to meet the needs of youngsters with special educational needs. We had the next code of practice in 2014, and that probably coincided with Yael transferring from a relatively successful, it certainly had a bit of a rocky time there, but a relatively successful primary education to her secondary school. And as you know, large secondary schools, 10 teachers, lots of rules, uniforms, bells, get to lessons on time, this is the way you go to lessons, all of that kind of stuff, which Yael had immense difficulty complying with. Never mind what was being taught in the lessons, my memory of it is that Yael's difficulties were about anything other than being in lessons. She got detentions for not getting homework in time. She got detentions for not arriving at the lesson because Yael couldn't find her way around the school because of her special educational needs. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, Yael. And so there was a spiral for Yael of what we heard from the previous speaker, of her needs not being understood. And the 2014 Code of Practice introduced the concept of educational healthcare plans rather than statements. And that was the time, I think, when Yael, I don't think you ever had a statement. I think you had an education healthcare plan right from the beginning of your assessment. And the 2014 Code of Practice really strengthened the voice of the child and the voice of the parent. And it recommended a much greater multi-agency approach towards meeting special educational needs. And I recognise that this flies in the face of what our previous speaker said, because her child's experience is not unusual, and they didn't experience a good multidisciplinary approach to that child, to her daughter's needs. Most importantly, it firmly planted the class teacher or the subject teacher as being responsible for educating all of the children in their class, including those with special educational needs. And that was tremendously challenging for teachers who hadn't been trained in how to do this and had no idea how to manage some of the complex needs that were presented to them. And they don't feel confident to do this. So children were shoehorned into a provision, a square peg in a round hole. That was the metaphor that was used, and that was absolutely right. There was another pressure on schools at this time. There was a political pressure. This was pre-2010 when then we had a Labour, I'm not making this political, but when we had a Labour government in office, they were pushing the inclusion agenda. So on the one hand, you had schools being wanting to make the best inclusive practices for the children that they had with special educational needs. But on the other hand, they had league tables and SATs, and they had to prove that their children, all of their children and young people, were making expected progress or better. And that's a balancing act that's really hard to reconcile. So if you make very good inclusive practices, you're bound to have some children who are not going to reach national expectations because of their cognitive abilities, because of their social, emotional, mental health needs. They are not going to meet the milestones that are set. The most successful schools, it sounds like the one your daughter is at now, the most successful schools manage to do that because they use amazing assessment for learning techniques, and they allow children to be individuals, and they listen to children, and they communicate with them, and they take the children a part of deciding their own learning. Those schools are very successful, but many schools don't know how to do that. And so this balance between inclusion and special and results is still a challenge for schools today. So where does that leave us now? Our system, I want to challenge and ask you how far you think we've come along towards inclusion. It's a continuum. It's not a place. It's a process. It's not something that you can give a pill for or that comes down from heaven. We all have to work extremely hard to make educational establishments inclusive. And one of the difficulties that I see is that we seem incapable of making provision without labeling children. And in labeling children, we're already segregating them. I often hear people say, oh, there's a young person with autism. I actually find that quite offensive, because it isn't an illness, it's part of who that child or young person is. And I'd much rather people use language such as, this is a person who is living with autism. We need to know as educators that once I know that label, it's useful only until I get to know that child. And once I get to know that child, I don't need the label. I can educate the child as I see them in front of me. So are there alternatives? This is my final point. Are there alternatives to the model that we have now? In Finland, there is no language of special educational needs. The children, all children are taught, not individually, they're taught in classes, obviously, but teachers know how to identify the unique needs of each child. And that starts in a system that doesn't have inspection, where they don't do exams, public exams, until they're way into their high teens, and where the teaching is a highly valued profession that students are invited to apply for. And you have to be an exceptional young person to be invited to apply to train to teach in Finland. The teaching is 7 years, the training is 7 years. Every teacher is trained to master's level, and the model that they use for training teachers is called reflective practice. So then they're not giving the children a diet of this is what you have to know in history or maths or geography or French. They're challenging children to learn through research and reflection and thinking and questioning. And that's how, it's a very generalized way of me explaining this, because I haven't got much time, but that's how they can meet the unique needs of every child. And there are schools that do it here, and I would just love to see those schools used as exemplars and the models such as Finland to really inform our SEN practice. One final point, there are international scales called PISA scales where they rank countries according to the outcomes that children achieve. Finland is always up there in the top few. We in the UK come middle to bottom on that list. And on that note, I'll finish. And Yael's in the upper sixth and doing wonderfully and has a wonderful future ahead of her. So you've made it despite the odds, Yael. Well done.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
This is the second again, so just show you that.
Next, we have Nicole. In the 7 years I've known her, her professional career has gone from strength to strength. Starting off in a specialist provision, she then worked in mainstream secondary school supporting students with SEN. Over the past few years, she has qualified as a PE teacher and is now training to be an educational psychologist. From personal experience, I can say that she truly cares and is an inspiration to all. Nicole Carr, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, thanks, Yael. What an absolutely magnificent introduction. I don't think I could ever ask for a much higher praise from somebody who knows me so well. So, as Yael really correctly said, I've been very fortunate in my career to have quite a wide range of opportunities. I'm going to talk a little bit about language. Because, as we've just heard, and throughout all of our talks this evening, we really have this undercurrent that language is everything. The words we use to describe ourselves and those around us, they really shape thoughts, feelings, behaviours, opportunities, success and failure. Even the word failure has a completely different feel to the word mistake. Language is our greatest tool and our greatest weapon. As Yael said, I started my career working in really specialist settings for kids with special needs. I worked in this wonderful special needs school for young people who have severe, profound and multiple special educational needs. That first school was my benchmark, a special school with a community who had appropriate and high aspirations for all of the students, no matter what additional needs they had. I learned there that we need to treat everybody with respect and understanding, no matter what additional needs they have. Everybody can reach the top of their own mountain. I learnt the power of language. Children are people first, despite their needs, despite their diagnosis. They have likes and dislikes, ups and downs, and all the other things that life throws at us. Their labels and their special educational needs doesn't and shouldn't define them. It's a bit like saying a young person's special educational needs are the only thing about them. It's a bit like saying that a person's a GP and that's all we can say about them. They might be a brilliant GP. A child might have special educational needs, but they also might be amazing at playing music, or they might be an amazing friend, or they might be amazing at creative writing. A person's job doesn't define them, and a child's special educational needs doesn't define them. It's not the only thing we can know or say about it. They're people first. Children have to be children before they are children with special educational needs. They are children who have SEN, not SEN children. At that first school I worked in, everybody knew and understood this. The students were students and humans and people before they were students with SEN. We got to know them. We really got to know them. We built relationships with them. They got to know what we liked and what we disliked. And they start doing little things like little jokes, things to make you laugh. We really had to know and understand their special educational needs, but we also knew and understood the people underneath them. Our language reflected that. We celebrated those really small wins because they were huge steps up that person's individual mountain. A child learning a new sign, asking for something for the first time, or being able to do an activity for the first time. All massive steps and hugely important. Small steps up their mountain. We praised, we shared, we celebrated together. Their SEN definitely impacted all aspects of their learning, but the language we used was positive and it lifted them. It did not define them. I first met Yael when I was her LSA. Looking back now, I realise that idea that children are children first and shouldn't be defined by their need or labels really underpinned our relationship. I got to know her and we built a relationship based on mutual respect and a shared love of sport. I remember the first day I met you. I'd read her file, but the child that I met was completely different. We had lunch together and we just chatted about life, about sport. We didn't have any conversations to do with her learning at all. We just had lunch. And we bonded. And I started to realise what her mountain might look like and how I might help her climb it. But we didn't need to have a conversation about that. Not once did we mention anything to do with her learning. We just chatted. Her labels didn't define her in my eyes. But throughout my career, I've been really surprised, consistently surprised, by how much that mindset does not ripple across schools. Now look, I live in the real world. I totally get that there are inconsistencies in how people approach things, especially in schools. I get that people have got varying experiences and beliefs, but I've lost count of the amount of adults that I've encountered in my career that use negative or unhelpful language to put children who have SEN into categories or boxes. And they don't even mean it. I'm not talking about debates about labelling, whether we should medicate children who have a diagnosis of ADHD, or whether dyslexia is a helpful or unhelpful label. I'm just talking about the day-to-day language that we all use. Language that shapes aspiration, opportunities, and self-esteem. For example, when a child is supported in a mainstream secondary school classroom by a teaching assistant or learning support system, more often than not, that supporting member of staff is absolutely not an expert in each subject. The class teacher is the expert. An LSA is not an expert in history and maths and chemistry. The class teacher is the expert. But in my experience, I see countless examples of staff saying things like, oh, Rio, she's got SEN. I've got loads in that class. I don't know what I'm going to do in that lesson. Rio's LSA can sort them out. But Rio's LSA is not an expert in chemistry. That doesn't even make any sense. That becomes even more apparent as Rio moves up to school and starts to do her GCSE. That poor LSA who's working really hard and might be an expert in Rio or their needs. They're not an expert in all the different subjects. They couldn't possibly be. However, Rio's LSA can sort them out. That's what the common saying is. Rio's LSA knows them. They just, yeah, why don't you just take them out? Yeah, go on. That subtle but powerful language of thought creates division. And it creates a false paradise in terms of inclusion. That said, I am not bashing teachers. I love teaching. You can see that my whole demeanour has changed when I've said that. Teaching makes me so happy. But teaching is hard. And it's in a system that's complex and murky. Teachers are so stretched. Most of the time, they haven't had adequate or robust or practical training in relation to SEN. Nor do they even have the time or space to think, reflect, and develop their skills to be able to support kids who do have SEN in their classes. They are busy. It is a level of busy that you do not understand unless you have been a teacher or you live with a teacher, because you're not seeing your other half if they're a teacher. They're faced with having to do more with less, along with their own performance management and their career development, and the fact that they feel like the kids' grades solely rely on literally everything that goes on in their classroom. Don't forget the jammed photocopier or the fact that someone's nicked the interactive whiteboard remote. It's a day-to-day struggle, I tell you. But language shapes aspiration and opportunity. So back to Rio. That subtle but powerful language means she learns that her SEN defines her, and somehow she's having to rely on a less skilled adult to support her rather than the class teacher, who is the expert in that subject. She becomes an SEN kid. An SEN kid. A phrase that makes her feel like she's a problem. Her teacher doesn't improve her knowledge of SEN and has no idea that Rio is amazing at creative writing, that she's an outstanding sportswoman or really good with animals. She's just Rio who has SEN, and her LSA will keep an eye and support her. She doesn't get praised by her class teacher. And when she does well, nobody notices. She doesn't get the support she needs. Her class teacher abdicates responsibility to the LSA. Rio learns that even though she's sat in the same classroom as her peers, she's different, and the gap widens. So, she seeks support from other people. She asks her peer in the lesson for some help, because we know the LSA is not the subject specialist. So she asks another child. Except, when you ask another child in a classroom and you're not supposed to be talking, you get into trouble. Rio ends up in detention. Nobody stops to ask her why she was talking. She gets in detention. So, Rio has to keep going. She realises no matter how hard she's trying, she's not getting anywhere. Her self-esteem suffers and she stops trying. She gets bored in lessons, ends up in more dissensions. And it's easier for her not to try and to attribute her lack of success to effort. She's not stupid, but she might give herself that label. Language is powerful, but in that example, aspirations for Rio are low. Now look, this sounds like a pretty bleak picture that I'm painting for you right now, but there is hope. Some mainstream schools would not even consider having children with additional needs participate in the wider life of the school. In my experience, children with SEN are not even considered for trips, to play in the school sports team, to play in the music concert, perform in the school play. But there is hope. There are adults, handfuls of adults, beautifully committed, wonderful adults who go above and beyond. They care, they really care, and they champion high aspirations for everyone. They are adults who will use the power of language positively. They say things like, Rio, she's amazing at football. Of course she can play for the school team. Why does it matter if she's got any additional needs? We can make it work. Or they say, Samir, brilliant at music. Absolutely, they can play in the school music concert. They use language to rewrite the narrative, the stories and ideas that we hold about Rio and Samir. They don't let those children's SEN define their experiences or the opportunities that they get. They have high aspirations. Granted, Samir might only play one song in the school play or the school musical because that's all they can manage, but they use language to make that happen. They use language to challenge what others think and to help kids like Samir take a step up their mountain, and they celebrate together. So what can we all do? Well, thanks to coronavirus, we all understand how important it is for everyone to feel connected to their community. But this was always true for children who experience SEN, even before this global pandemic. The language we use makes all the difference. It's my dream that we will have school communities that use language positively and have high aspirations for all, including children who also have SEN. Aspirations might be different. For example, one young man I worked with wanted to go to university. Another young man, he wanted to learn to drive, and he wanted to go to college and study an animal care course. Both of these boys had language used to create negative narratives. Nobody believed that either of those two boys were going to go on and do what they've done. Nobody. Together, we use language to rewrite the next chapters of their story. The language used was about support. Aim high, work hard. Both of these young men could have very easily become SEN kids. But I'm proud to say that today they're both out there in the real world, realising their dream. We changed the idea that their glasses were half empty to being half full. They are children first and foremost. Inclusion is what we're after. That is not Rio sitting in the same classroom as everyone else, looking like she's included when she's actually not. It's proper inclusion, community, connection, high aspirations, but appropriate aspirations for all, and positive language. I've been fortunate to work in a variety of mainstream and special schools. Based on my experience, I truly believe we are all agents of change. We can all spend just a little time thinking about how we use language to open doors and not close them. Change starts with small steps, just like climbing a mountain. Children with SEN deserve high aspirations, and we do them and society a disservice to afford them with anything less. That is the real concept of inclusion. And we are all morally obliged to work towards that, one day at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. If anyone has any questions, please ask before the Q&A starts, because, you know, technology and all that. So. Finally, we have Kathy. Kathy is the head of Red Balloon Learner Centre at North West London, the school that I went to after not managing mainstream. She always believed in me, and it was her actions that ensured that I was able to achieve my best. She works her socks off to ensure that every young person she encounters has a positive educational experience no matter what their challenges are. Her work is truly amazing, and I have the utmost respect for her. Kathy Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. It's really lovely to hear that. And I'm just so proud of you organising this event today and in everything that you've done and how far you've come since you left us as well. I couldn't be prouder of you. So thank you. So you've heard a little bit about Red Balloon. Gareth's mentioned a few things, and I'm also very grateful to everyone for supporting us and making a donation for us tonight. So thank you for that. But let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are a small therapeutic school in Northwest London. We try and be everything that a mainstream school isn't. So a lot of our work centres around undoing the damage that mainstream schools have done to young people that come to us. We're based in a house. We are a community. We are all on a level. We are all there to learn, and that includes the adults and the young people. We support each other. We get to know each other. We laugh together. We cry together. We throw things at each other sometimes. Everything that we do it together. We eat our lunch together. We go for walks together. We're curious together. Everything that we learn about together. And students will come in and they want to learn about something that we have never heard about. And so we learn about it together. And by taking away the rigidity of a mainstream school, by stopping forcing young people to learn things that they have no relevance to, they're not interested in, and they don't care about, they actually regain what we all have inside ourselves. We all have a spark of curiosity, and by taking away all those forced pressures, they start to ask, as a really annoying toddler does, why? Why is this? Why is that? They start to discover what kind of things they would like to learn about. We try and learn about it with them. We try and help them find their way, but everything that we do is student-centred, and everything that we do is about supporting the students to become who they want to be. Alongside that, we help them discover how to look after themselves. So our wellbeing curriculum is just as important as our academic provision. So students with us will have timetabled sessions where they will do things like yoga, meditation, baking, gardening, Pilates, whatever they find that makes them feel good. And it might be that they're discovering something completely new that makes them feel good. Horse riding, camping, trips out in the world, going to see art exhibitions, going to take photographs of nature, whatever it is that makes them feel good, because nobody is going to be looking after them through their lives. They have to learn how to look after themselves and how to make themselves feel good. So who comes to Red Balloon? We've heard a lot about SEN this evening. We're not an SEN school. Many of our students have SEN, but that's a side issue. The people that come to Red Balloon come from such a wide variety of backgrounds, such a wide variety of academic abilities. The common factors that they have are the fact that they've not been catered for in the mainstream educational sector. They may have completely undiagnosed and unmet special educational needs, particularly students who've been moved from school to school to school. They've just never got to the point where they've been assessed. They may have been on a waiting list in one school, moved on again, been on a waiting list again, never been diagnosed. We've talked already this evening about the lack of support for SEN. So they may have a diagnosis, but they may have not received any of the support that they needed through their educational career. They may have just found the environment of a mainstream secondary school too much to manage. Educationally, they may be absolutely competent in meeting all the needs that the teacher is setting out for them. But at the same time, they can't manage to go into the lunch hall. So they spend their afternoon hungry because they haven't eaten, because it was just too much, too noisy, too echoey, too many smells, too much choice, too many pressures from the other peers around them. Many of our students have a history, sadly, of abuse or trauma or bullying that they've received in schools. And that is unacceptable. But as Sam said earlier, often the trauma has actually been caused by the educational system itself and the professionals that are working with those young people. The trauma doesn't have to have happened outside of school. And a lot of our early work when students come to us centres around undoing the damage that fellow educational professionals have done to our students. And that's just not acceptable to me at all. Even the aspect of gaining a place at somewhere like Red Balloon, gaining a place that's a suitable provision for a child's educational needs. A mainstream school has to demonstrate that they've put lots and lots of interventions into place to support a young person to engage with the education that the mainstream provision is providing. So they put an intervention into place and it doesn't work because it's not going to work, because the school isn't right for that student. And so the student fails, that intervention doesn't work, and they have to put another intervention into place, and another, and all this process has to be documented. The child has to jump through all these hoops that show the child that they're a failure, that none of these things are working for them, that they're completely impossible for the mainstream school to cater for them. And so this young person feels so incredibly demoralised and excluded by this process already, that by the time the mainstream school can evidence that they cannot meet this person's needs, by that point, by the time they come to us, the child feels completely defeated. And so instead of seeing that they've now come to a completely different educational provision that can help them and that can support them to achieve whatever it is that they want to achieve, instead of feeling like that, they feel like, here I am. This is where the failures go. This is where the kids that couldn't make it work in mainstream end up. And so when they come to us, I'll hear things like, oh, there's no point. Oh, there's no point in me coming to school because I'll never make anything of myself. Or, well, now I'm at a place like this, I'll never be able to study Japanese because they don't do things like this at a place like this. And so they feel like when they come to what I am so proud of, an educational provision that can give them everything that whatever they want and can cater exactly to their needs, instead of feeling like that's a wonderful opportunity, they feel like they're there because they have failed. And so all of our work in induction, in getting them settled, centres around helping them see who they are, helping them realise what they want to learn, helping them to regain the sense that they can be something and they can make something with their lives. So I would like to echo what some of the other speakers have said this evening. We are prioritising inclusion, and that's really important. But what does inclusion mean? We're looking at mainstream schools which are designed to cater for every child, supposedly. How can we possibly have a school that will cater for every child? Children are so different, so magical, so wonderful, completely different people. How we can possibly have one school that should cater for them is as illogical as saying that adults should all work in the same industry, should all live in the same kind of house, should all have the same hobbies. It doesn't work like that. We're all different people. We choose our own pathways. And so every speaker, I think, has used the same metaphor. Fitting a square peg into a round hole, all that does is damage the square peg. Why should we do that to young people? It's traumatic for them. There's no doubt about it. And so even within local authorities who've seen that there is a need for an alternative type of school provision, they will say, okay, here's the mainstream school. This is where all the kids go to school. There's a few kids outside of here who can't really make it work there. So they all lie around the outside of this mainstream school. This one's got this reason, this one's got this reason, this one's got this reason. They're all outside of this for different reasons. And the local authority will go, great, okay, sweep them all up. None of them fit in there. We'll put them here. They all go in the alternative provision. And that's even worse because now you've got this kid and this kid and this kid and this kid and this kid all together in the alternative provision. So they're all wildly different to one another. They're all wildly have different needs, different interests, different reasons why they didn't fit in. And we're going to put them all together. That doesn't make sense either. And so what is really needed is so many more different kinds of schools. Why are we putting them all into one? Everyone is different. Everyone deserves the kind of provision that suits them. Everyone will have different wishes for different environments, for different interests, to discover the things that they really love, the things they're passionate about, the things that they want to pursue into their lives. And so there is a change. I see it already. There is a change in local authorities where they're seeing a need now for more different provisions, a whole rainbow of different ones, not the main one and the kind of quirky one, but actually lots of different provisions. Make them smaller, let them meet everybody's needs. I'll give a few examples of the kind of wildly different stories even students at Redbird will have. We had a student who came to us and she had decided already that she was stupid. On her very first day, I did a baseline test with her. At this point, I was the science teacher. And we went through her test and we started on the first page and she told me that she wouldn't be able to do the test because she couldn't read. So, okay, all right, you can't read. So I can read the question, I can write down your answers. But we're still going to do the test because we want to find out what you know already about science. So we went through the test, and at the end, I think she got maybe about 80%, something like that. She'd done really well. This girl, I could tell just from the first assessment, she was so good at science. Her logical brain was incredibly apt for science. And I told her how well she'd done, and she said, no, you've done it wrong. It was a test on the computer. She said, you've pressed the wrong button, you've got your settings wrong. I'm not any good at science. I've never done well in a test in science. And I said, well, how are you ever going to do well in a test in science if it's written down and you can't read? And she had spent so much of her educational career covering up to teachers here and there and everywhere that she couldn't read because she was so ashamed of that. And so she would copy from her friend and get detention for that. Or she would pretend that she knew the answer to something and she didn't need to do it. Or she would behave in a way that meant that she got sent out of the class because then she didn't have to read. She'd spent so much energy hiding the fact that she couldn't read that no one had actually just taught her to read because they'd spent so much time dealing with the behaviours around that they hadn't taught her to read. We taught her to read. We taught her to read in such a short time because she was really clever. And it was really easy to teach her to read because she wanted to by this point. She realised that she could be someone. And once she could read, she flew. She did really well. She got her GCSE in science. She got a whole range of other qualifications as well. She's now at college. She's doing really, really well. We had another student who he first came to us from a hospital school. He couldn't make it in through the front door without becoming unconscious. So the first few times he came in, he would just be outside the front door, unconscious on the floor. And all of this was caused by the stress and trauma of the concept of going to school. He'd never even been in Oz. He didn't know what it was like. It was just the trauma of the concept of coming into a school because he had been so traumatized by the school experience. And for him, it was because he is an amazing person. He is so wacky and wonderful, and he has out there interests and out there dress sense. And that's something that should be celebrated. But as we all know, most of us have been to a mainstream school in which we know that you're not different in a mainstream school. That is completely frowned upon. And all the other kids will destroy someone who's a little bit out there, and he was way out there. So of course he was destroyed by that experience. And the answer to that is maybe, let's get him a buddy, let's get him a friend, let's encourage him. Maybe don't wear the quirky hat to school. Maybe leave that at home because the other kids might pick on you. The minute he settled with us and the minute he started to realise that actually it's completely fine to have a variety of different hats that you might put on different days. It's completely fine to walk down the street with a cane if that's what you fancy doing. The minute he realised that actually the wonderful and wacky person that he is could be celebrated and could be something that he feels proud of, he's going out there with his different hats on every day with his waistcoat and tie with a bit of a swagger because he realised that actually that's someone who's great. And he's at college now. He's at completely mainstream college, educationally doing incredibly well, has such a wide circle of friends. Everyone likes him because he's so proud to be who he is that no one would dare pick on him or bully him or destroy him for who he is because he would just laugh at them. And that's what's needed, is to be celebrating those weird and wonderful people. Then you've got someone who's sat in here with me, someone who has thrown things at me, someone who has told me where to go on numerous occasions, someone who came to us and wasn't sure really who she was because she knew she didn't fit in. She knew she hadn't fitted in before. She'd been given all kinds of different labels, and she spent most of her time with us trying to work out who she was. So every day she'd be a different person. She'd be all different kinds of people. Some of them were lovely, some of them were perhaps not the best choice of identity. But she just needed a little bit of space to realise that it was actually fine to be yourself. It's fine to be whoever you are. You don't need to give yourself a label. You don't need to give yourself a persona. You don't need to be different people on different days to please the different people that are around you. You can just be you. And that's fine, because who you are is just incredible. Someone with so much drive, someone with so much determination, someone who picks a path, decides where she wants to be and goes for it. And I've seen that in you, and I see that in you just in organising this tonight. And I have so much respect for you, because you can just be the person that you are. And that kind of highlights the variety of different stories that our students come from, and that different backgrounds and different experiences. And it brings me back to what's recently been coined as a bit of a kind of tagline for Red Balloon, which I think is incredibly meaningful. And it's, school isn't for everyone, but education should be. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so much. Hopefully that speech demonstrates the amazing work that Red Balloon does and the success stories that they can churn out no matter what state a student comes to them in. Whew. Yeah. I have an apology to make. When I advertised this event, the flyer states an evening of experts given a multi-dimensional view on the impact of mainstream school on students with SEN. 4/5 of that information was correct, but I am no expert and will not pretend to be one. However, I've been on a journey and learned so much along the way. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Yael Adams. I'm 17 years old, currently studying 3 A-levels and completing an EPQ. I have a number of special educational needs, including executive functioning difficulties, dyslexia, dyspraxia, as well as diagnostic features of ADHD, ASD, tics, and OCD. These impact on my day-to-day functioning, and I can become easily overloaded. But enough about me and my labels. This evening, I want to focus on mainstream education and special educational needs. It is my educational journey that has led me to have an interest in this subject area. I spent 3 years at Red Balloon Learner Centre, which enabled me to thrive personally, socially, and academically. I feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to attend such a unique provision. And I know so many other people who struggled in a mainstream school who would have benefited from such a setting. I know Kathy has already spoken about Red Balloon this evening. I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the amazing work they do for young people who have been out of education for a period of time. After my GCSEs, I was ready to return to mainstream school and now attend the King Alfred School, or CAS as it is known. It's a private mainstream school, but their ethos is so different from others. Their philosophy is a student-centered approach. They appreciate that every child is unique and has their own set of strengths, attributes, and areas to develop. Both Red Balloon and CAS have similar outlooks. Students wear their own clothes, teachers are known by their first names. They do not want students to have unnecessary pressures, stress, or fear. They both allow students to develop at their own pace. The tensions are not handed out. Rather, a supportive environment is developed. Staff work hard to understand an individual's behaviour, and work in relationships between students and staff evolve through mutual respect and trust. This type of environment allows many students with SEN to thrive. The reason I have spoken about these schools is because I often question why mainstream state schools rarely have the same ethos. There could be many answers to this, and I'm not going to second guess them now. But I do believe that there are numerous students with special educational needs who are trapped in the system. They are the square peg in a round hole. They're in a mainstream secondary school. This often causes an increase in anxiety levels and leads to a student to feel out of control. Why does this happen? What's being done about this, and where do these students end up? There is little doubt that some pupils with special educational needs will ultimately require specialist provision. However, I do believe that from students I've met and from research I've carried out, many would be able to go through mainstream education if a number of factors could be addressed and resources, including training and financial support, could be provided by the government for mainstream schools. For my extended project qualification, I've written a research project. I specifically analysed the impact of mainstream school on pupils with anxiety disorders. My findings, which included interviewing students directly, evidence that if a plan is in place, all members of staff are trained and debriefed about a child's needs and are understanding about situations which may arise, then there is a much higher chance that the student will cope with the pressures of school and succeed. Most of the students I interviewed have had negative impacts, have had negative experiences within mainstream schools. This evidences that there is a need for a greater emphasis on pastoral care to help students with anxiety cope with the constant and challenging academic demands. It is of my opinion that an excellent place to begin for the government. It is of my opinion that an excellent place to begin would be for the government to learn from schools such as Cass. Surely not all students with SEN who struggle with the mainstream environment need to move to such a specialist provision such as Red Balloon. Others can end up being school refusers or being homeschooled. Why can't there be state schools suitable for these young people? Schools based on a more relaxed environment that embrace the individual and look to their strengths, similar to the ethos at Cass and Red Balloon. By unlocking and primarily supporting the well-being and mental health of students, successful learning becomes possible. Many pupils with SEN are bright and want to learn, and the education system should have a duty of care to ensure that there is equal access for all children to a suitable education. Currently, schools like Red Balloon and Cass are few and far between, and to my knowledge, non-existent in the state sector. More provisions like this are required. Finally, back to Red Balloon. Red Balloon Learner Centre is a charity that is so dear to my heart, and as already mentioned, I am fundraising for it tonight. Please donate so that they can continue their incredible work and support more and more students that would massively benefit from them. If you are able to make a donation, no matter how small, please look at the Zoom chat for a donation link with the details. I will also forward an email with this. Thank you. Now we're going to do a question and answer session. There should be some questions on the Zoom chat, or we will stream any questions anyone has on the Zoom chat live. And then if anyone in the audience wants to ask, feel free. So if my speakers want to come on up, we'll do that. And then we'll be done.
We'll get Carol in as well.
Okay.
Cheers. Carol's joining us there as well.
Brilliant. Right.
Save this one.
Oh, good, take time. Okay. This one is for you, Sam. Can we have details of the report that was commissioned by this speaker, please? From Carrie Herbert. The report that you did that got a lot of signatures.
The survey.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. Forward. Do you want actual details, or you want me to
Just
forward to
chat
you?
about it.
I wrote a letter a few years ago to the former Prime Minister David Cameron. It was an open letter asking where all the money had gone for the CAMS budget, which was promised to be about £2.5 billion across the country. The response I got from the open letter was so immense. I was like sitting there thinking, I can't believe I'm the only person going through this. This just doesn't make sense. So I then commissioned a survey that was distributed widely. I was in touch at the time with Luciana Berger, who at the time was the Shadow Minister for Mental Health. And she said to me, if you can push this and get over 1,000 responses, she will do her best to get it into the mainstream media, which she did. She got it featured in the Sunday Mirror. She got questions raised based on the survey results. It was quite a varied survey. It was just questions about people's experiences with the SEN provisions. It was questions about CAMS and where they found themselves in. But I am happy to share the results with you. That'd be great. Get them sent out. That's fine.
Brilliant, brilliant. This is a question for Carol. Oh, my God,
Oh yes, 2 secs. She'll come back.
Quite terrifying, actually. Oh my God.
2 seconds, sorry.
Remember the day when you brought in so many masks of your face and all the students had your face on? Every student had your face on. It's like that, yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. Oh,
Great.
Okay, Carol. Why is there always the assumption that SEN children have little cognitive ability?
I hope it's not wide now as it was in years gone by. I think that when I did my training, there was no training for special educational needs. My teacher training was remedial education. I was a PE teacher, and my second subject was remedial education. And I went to teach PE and remedial education in a girls' secondary school. And we had a cupboard where we took children to teach them to read. The assumption was that people focused on their children's cognitive ability. They didn't recognize that somebody's ability to learn was dependent on their mental well-being and whether they trusted adults and whether they were in an environment that enabled them to learn. And if you're not in an environment that enables you to learn, you can be labeled as cognitively impaired or unable to learn. But it very often is nothing to do with your cognitive ability at all. Has that answered the question, Yael?
Brilliant. There's also another question for you here. If children are acting out, parents and children get loads of support. If the child is not causing a fuss but still needs support, I can't read your writing. Is it so much harder to get support? I think it's basically saying if the child is not causing a fuss, is it harder for them to get support?
I think that children who exhibit unwanted behaviours certainly get the teacher's attention much more quickly than the child that sits at the back of the class and doesn't say anything. Perhaps a child with an eating disorder or a child who's very anxious may not act out, and they will, the way things stand at the moment, they will, unless that cry for help is heard in some way, they will find it more difficult to get support. From where we come from at Southover Partnership, our mantra is all behaviour has meaning, whether it's acting out behaviour or very quiet behaviour where a child is very introverted. And the question that we're constantly asking ourselves is, what's the meaning of that behaviour?
Yeah. Has anyone in the audience got any questions? I don't know if that's on. Go on, man.
I don't know who really is directed at making stand. So I have a child that's going to need to be sent into mainstream, well, potentially mainstream school, who's just been diagnosed with ADHD or in the process of getting an AHCP. So I'm looking at 2 schools. What are the questions, with everything you're saying, how do I know what's going to happen? So what are the questions I should be asking to identify if that's the right school?
So for me, I think a lot of it comes down to your gut feeling. When you walk around a school, you just get a sense of whether, first of all, meet the Senko, because that's the person that's going to be your main point of contact throughout. So meet the Senko, and if you get that feeling that, yeah, this is going to work, you kind of just know. But my biggest thing is not to be afraid to change something as well. If you go into the school, nothing's not fixable. So if you go into the school and you think this school isn't right, it's just not working out, don't be afraid to look at other schools and see what's out there. And I think for us, that was our biggest regret. I was going to say mistake, I'm not sure mistake's the right word, but it's our biggest regret that we got into that first primary school and we were so taken with what we were being told that we didn't want to believe that we could find something else that was better for her. We were so grateful to have a school that we thought was amazing that actually was destroying us. So I think it's just to be brave and see what else is out there if you're not happy.
Any more questions from the audience, or all good? And then I don't know if there's any more questions via Zoom. If anyone has a question to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But if not, we can just get on.
The chat would be good if there is.
Yeah.
That's a nice comment.
Anything? All good?
Keeps on their toes. Can't imagine that.
Okay. All right, I guess I'll just do thank yous. Okay. You guys can sit by down and just do it. Completely up to you.
Feel quite settled here. If I'm
Fair enough. Stay comfy, stay comfy. Okay. Oh my god, there's too many cards. All right. What an amazing night. I hope everyone's learned a little more from this evening, but I do have a couple of thank yous before I let you go. Firstly, I would like to thank my speakers, Sam, Carol, Nicole, and Kathy. Thank you so much for your time and effort. I genuinely, I appreciate it. I think we can all agree that you truly are experts in the field. Next, I want to thank Matt, my technical coordinator. Without him, this night really wouldn't have happened, and we all know how complicated technology can get in COVID world, let's be honest. I would also like to thank King Alfred's for allowing me to use the theatre and supporting me. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be at such an amazing school, because when I was looking for the sixth one, let's be honest, Mum, we didn't really find many suitable choices, did we? It was quite difficult finding the right one, eh? It's all good though. Okay. Next, the wonderful Pauline. Throughout my EPQ journey, Pauline has been guiding me and ensuring that this night is the best that it can be. Thank you, really, for all of your time. Finally, my darling mother. I mean, she's my mom, you know. I mean, you know what moms do. But nah, for real, she went through the system to get me into Red Balloon. She went through the system to get me into CAS, and it, you know, there were tribunals, there was money, there was everything, and I mean, I'm here, and that's all down to you. So genuinely, like, I couldn't ask for a better one. Sorry to get sappy, but I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of support everyone here has given me, and I have learned so much from this experience. Please, if there is anything you guys at home want to donate, it would be amazing, because no matter how small, it will make a difference. And I think we can all agree that Red Balloon deserves to carry on changing lives with their amazing work. So thank you very much, and over and out.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess I'll get out, I guess now, because I think this is loud. I know. There you go. Yeah.
That's very good.
Right.
Are we allowed to do a hug?
Too many people watching.